I love these cryptocurrencies. Actually, they were for a long time ago. Actually, your department was organizing like these meetings for a long time. Probably it stopped for a while because of some.
I put together code-based crypto. I put together post-quantum crypto, large meetings at Pier 66 down in Fort Lauderdale with international inclusion, cybersecurity, information security, people from Oxford in England, people from Cambridge who had worked with Hawkins their whole life in this area. And the math behind it that has grown into be the math behind. So anyway, I'm a musician, but I've been here and I do help organize these things. Please share this with information with any of your friends or people who would be interested. And I'm going to add you to our email list. So I'll send you the stuff. And if you can help distribute it, it would be very much appreciated.
Yeah, and I'll be also happy to attend some of these meetings if there is some possibility in future, or
There's all kinds of stuff here and elsewhere as well. So I'll keep you in the loop.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So I see it's recording automatically now, so it's fine, right? So I don't need to do. I see here a recording, but I have no control over it. So
That's correct. It's fine.
Okay, good.
Thank you. Have a great meeting. Bye, Mila.
Bye. It is recorded actually, the meeting, because oops.
So welcome. Okay. Yes. So good morning or good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining this Crypto Cafe. So today we have a special guest, a student of EdDSA, who will talk about their work on elliptic curve implementation, right? And especially on special architecture. So we are looking forward to this talk, and so the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much. Okay, well, thank you first for coming. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. Of course, if you have any questions, please interrupt me and ask me. I'm ready to. I tried to summarize a lot of things. We always want to tell more than the time gives us opportunity. But yes, basically, my name is Mila Anastasova. I'm a student in Dr. Reza's director's team. And today I'm going to present our latest work, basically, which is named Time-Efficient Finite Field Microarchitecture Design for Curve 448 and ED448 on Cortex-M4. Even though this presentation is basically summarizing our latest work, I also try to include some kind of a timeline progress of how these multi-precision operations basically are executed on this target, and basically how these implementations have been progressed, how these techniques have been developed throughout the time. So I'm going to introduce very briefly the topic. Also, I'm going to introduce Curve 448 and ED448, the key exchange and the digital signature algorithms, very briefly, because I'm sure you're very familiar with this topic. I'm going to also summarize the main features, the main characteristic of the target platform, or basically the microcontroller that we're targeting. Also, I'm going to discuss exactly these multi-precision arithmetic techniques and basically how they changed. I'm going to go through a lot of techniques, and I'm going to mention their advantages and disadvantages. And the main reason to go into so many details and to start since so long time ago, it's to make it a little bit more clear what exactly the value of this work is and what is basically the novel, like the new part, our contribution basically to the topic. Finally, I'm going to present our proposed design architecture, and of course, we're going to discuss the performance results that we have obtained. So very briefly, going through the elliptic curve family of cryptographic family of schemes, basically, they are of high interest because, as we know, they ensure the lowest computational latency and also communicational latency, basically because of the very compact key sizes that they offer, but also because of the somehow simple operations that are required for the implementation of these schemes. This results, of course, in very efficient energy and power consumption, and also it does not require some particular bandwidth scenarios, which makes them, of course, very suitable for low-end devices. These attractive curves, which are relatively new, the curve 25519 and curve 448, which is basically the focus of this work, they have been already integrated in the TLS 1.3 network protocol based on their attractive properties. And very briefly to mention, even though like lately we're very focused on transitioning to post-quantum cryptography, basically we should mention that the optimizations, the implementation and optimizations of still classical cryptographic scheme is still important because very government requirements and industry requirements, they are not in compliance with this. These post-quantum schemes are not yet in compliance with their requirements, security requirements. So for smooth transition to post-quantum cryptography, probably most of the protocols are going to be operating in this kind of hybrid mode where classical and post-quantum primitives are being supported at the same time. Briefly mentioning the related work, where in this slide, I'm going to only mention the work that is focused on Curve 448 and ED448, basically targeting some high-end platforms or also low-end platforms. There is a different kind of related work which I'm going to talk about in a second. But basically starting with the high-end platforms, of course, after the integration into TLS 1.3, there is a large interest in optimizing basically these algorithms for high-end devices. One of the latest works is the team of Oliveira and his team. They presented the optimal fixed point multiplication targeting high-end devices. And also Faz Hernandez and his team, they presented also optimizations for Curve 448 targeting Intel AVX2, the vector instruction set that they have. However, the situation is not the same when it comes to low-end devices, since they're much more challenging due to the resources that they provide. There is not so much research or work in the literature for Curve 448. One of the few works are listed over here. First, Seo presented the implementation of Curve 448 on, let's call them very low-end target platforms, the 8-bit AVR and the 16-bit MSP processors. Years later, Seo and his team also presented the first implementation of Curve 448 on Cortex-M4, which is basically the target platform for this work. And later, actually, our team presented the implementation of the digital signature based on Edwards Curve 448, again targeting the same platform. But basically, we should say that this elliptic curve cryptography, it is very related. The core of the elliptic curve cryptography is basically this kind of finite field multi-precision operations, which we have only marked over here that there is wide work when it comes to this, but we're going to discuss in a little bit more details in a second. Summarizing our contributions, the first thing that we propose a new implementation of this finite field multi-precision multiplication technique, where actually we present the first implementation of hybrid execution flow in the inner multiplication loop, which we're going to discuss in a second. What exactly do we mean by that? And also another thing is we provide the first implementation of the multi-precision squaring when it comes to Curve 448 and ED448 on the given target platform. And as we can see, we observed improvement when it comes to Curve 448 of around 48%, almost percent. And when it comes to the ED448, the digital signature algorithm, basically we observed around 11% of improvement after we integrate our implementation designs into the algorithms. Again, without going into too many details over here, very briefly, just looking at the in the figure, we can summarize the elliptic curve Diffie Hellman algorithm and its execution, where it's very straightforward, as we can see and as we know. But the only thing that we're going to stress over here is that the point multiplication is the core, basically, operation, where Alice and both on the left and right hand side, they both execute two point multiplications in order to agree on some shared secret value. And in the same fashion, very shortly summarizing basically the Edwards curve digital signature algorithm, where again, we're not going to go into too many details, but just we can see from the graph that basically each one of the subroutines, the key generation, the sign, and the verify, they all, even though they include other algorithms, such as hashing or hash functions or extendable output functions, we can still see that in each one of these operations, in each one of these subroutines, basically, the point multiplication is a core operation. It's one of the main operations being executed. Going forward, we're going to actually discuss the target platform and its main features. We can see basically this is the microcontroller that we have used. It is based on ARM-based architecture. First of all, we should say that we chose this particular microcontroller. It's the STM32F407 VG, basically the discovery board, since it is the one that is recommended by the National Institute of Standards and Technology for benchmarking, basically for performance evaluation of cryptographic algorithms, particularly when it comes to low-end devices. This microcontroller, it features ARM-v7 architecture. Basically, it has the Cortex-M. It is based on Cortex-M4. It has 16 32-bit core registers or general purpose registers, where it is important to mention here that
Hanno sommerso.
sorry.
Immagino.
Oh, okay.
Audience to you?
Okay. Okay. Or probably I can mute, but let me see.
Quante ne so?
But I cannot click it.
Could you please mute yourselves, audience, please?
If there is somebody, please.
We can text. Okay, yeah. I think.
It's okay. No problem. It's okay. These things happen all the time. Yeah, as well.
So maybe can I interrupt and ask a question? Because I'm not the hardware person, but so basically there's no memory in this card.
There is a flash memory, of course, and there is registers. There is no cache memory in these devices. They're very low end.
I see.
Basically,
Vabbè.
store everything in the memory, like in the stack or in some particular address that you want. Either you can store them in the registers that. So this, yes, exactly, to use them and to operate on them. So this means, for example, if we want to operate on something, it can be like the maximum number of 32-bit values that we can have in this process in this device, like in all the Cortex-M4 basically platform is. They have a total of 16 32-bit registers. However, only 14 are accessible by the programmer, by the developer, because one of them is reserved for the stack pointer and one for the program counter. So basically, these values they cannot be touched. So only
suppose
14.
the underlying elliptic curve is like 256 bits, so it
Yeah.
barely fit into.
It is, yeah, exactly, because we should fit one operand, another operand, then the result, which is 2 times the length of the operand. So it is quite challenging to make it
I see
efficient
that.
because there is a lot of reloads that are required. And basically, a very, very good question, because it's really important when it comes to target specific implementation that every platform, it requires some kind of different strategy. It's not one that can be applied independently of the platform. So yeah, basically based on this very, very limited resources of this target platform, that is how we designed our implementation design. And also it is very important, your question as well, thank you for asking, because yeah, basically, because due to the fact that ARM basically is reduced instruction set computer, it ensures simple, powerful instructions, but simple, so they're ensured to be executed, especially on this platform, in one clock cycle. However, the memory accessing instructions, exactly what your question was about this reload and storing them in the register set and moving them back to the memory, then bringing them back to the register. This is basically more expensive, or in other words, it requires it may require 2 clock cycles because of if the instructions are not properly scheduled. So for instance, there may be stalls based on data dependencies. It may be due to structural hazards, and based on this implementation, basically not always this, because it looks very easy. Okay, you just reschedule everything and make everything, and you remove the data dependencies, but it is not so easy, and because we try to optimize the entire register set that is going to be used, so it is not always possible to avoid these stalls.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, yeah, thank you very much for the question because it was part of the next thing that I was going to say. But yes, basically the most important thing and the thing that we're focused on is basically exactly to avoid this kind of memory accessing instructions since they're more expensive.
So the ARM Cortex, so is it comparable to this STM microcontroller?
Yeah, this microcontroller basically it has the Cortex-M4. It features that Cortex-M4 already. So that's why yes, we chose this target.
Where is it used typically? On which kind of?
Basically, ARM-based architectures are very this, for example, the entire microcontroller, it costs probably $20. Like the entire microcontroller, probably the chip is much less. So basically, in everything that we can think of, everything that is Internet of Things, embedded devices, real-time systems, like for example, it may be for some healthcare devices inside the body, where, for example, this is one of the examples where cryptography is very important since it requires secure communication. It can be from weather detectors, like any kind of sensor, calculators, every kind of sensor, real-time systems. Basically, it has tons of applications, and we use this processor probably many times every day without even realizing it. But yeah, exactly based on the fact that it's very limited when it comes to resources, the main things that we have been focusing on in order to do our implementation design compact and efficient is first of all to use the entire register set, or in other words, all these 14 available 32-bit core registers. And also very important thing to mention is that this for the ARM-based architecture, it provides optional another 32-bit floating point registers. However, it is very important here to mention, to know that it is optional. For example, this microcontroller, it offers them, like it already has this floating point unit integrated. However, not all devices that are based on ARM-based architecture offer these additional 32-bit floating point registers. Another implementation strategy, or basically what we have been aiming to accomplish, is to operate on a larger operand set. And we're going to discuss in a second what exactly do we mean by that, and also to reorganize the instruction flow so that we get more efficient implementation. Okay, so in order for us to understand better exactly what is the value of this work, we're going to start by the most simple techniques for multi-precision multiplication. And I'm going to start by the operand scanning and product scanning techniques. I'm not going to go into too many details because I'm sure you know in detail what is happening. But basically, the most important thing, what I want to point in this slide is the representation, the notation that we're going to use during this presentation, and actually in a lot of works, it is also represented. Basically, this rhombus representation is very visual way of representing multi-precision arithmetic, not only multiplication. In this case, it is a multiplication, where each of the diagonal lines, basically, it is going to represent one limb, one word of our operand. So in other words, this line over here is going to represent A0, this line over here A1, this one A2, and so on. And in the other direction, they're going to represent the operand, the limbs of the operand B. So this one represents B0, B1, and so on. Another important thing to basically to understand what is being represented on this rhombus is basically we have to notice these bold dots over here, where each one of these dots represents one 32 by 32 multiplication, calling them short multiplications. And finally, very important is these bolded lines, which basically they represent the execution flow that we're following in order to perform the multiplication. So basically, discussing the operand scanning technique, we can see that every for every limb of the operand A, for example, A0, we perform multiplication with each single limb of the operand B, or in other words, we multiply A0 by the entire operand B. This operand scanning technique basically has like a main advantage, the simplicity of the implementation. Basically, however, we should notice that we should mention the disadvantages of this multiplication strategy. First of all, as we can see, for every bolded line, or in other words, row, how we're going to call them from now on, for every execution row, we have to load in this register step, in the registers of our processor, we have to load again all the values of the operand B, all the limbs of the operand B. Another disadvantage of this multiplication strategy is that these basically rows, they're going to produce partial results, which as well have to be stored in the memory and have to be loaded one more time for the next row that is being executed. So for each row, we have to be storing and loading again this kind of partial result in each step of our multi-precision multiplication. So addressing basically these main disadvantages of the operand scanning, now we can see on the slide the product scanning multi-precision multiplication, where exactly we can see that these kind of partial products are not even produced anymore. So we save a lot of memory accesses for loading, for storing, and loading this temporal partial result. How is this achieved? Well, basically, in each row, we compute the entire, we compute all the accumulative multiplications, small multiplications that are needed in order to, at the end, obtain the result without needing to have some partial values that are going to be stored in the memory and then loaded after that. Even though the product scanning, it eliminates the main disadvantage of the operand scanning, there is another disadvantage, a new disadvantage that is being introduced over here. And namely because, let's say, for example, for each column that is being computed, we have to load all the values of all the required values of the operand A and also of the operand B. So for example, if we want to compute this column over here, we have to have A0, A7, B0, A6, B1, and so on. Basically, we have to reload in each row. We have, for the computation of each column, basically, we have to reload the entire set of limbs of both operands. So in order to avoid, basically, or to address this disadvantage, there is this multi-precision multiplication technique, which is called hybrid multiplication. And as we say, combine the best of both worlds. Or in other words, taking the advantage of the operand scanning, basically, we can see that we're executing the simple kind of horizontal multiplications, which basically allows us to perform our operations in a simple way. However, as we can see, we only are going to operate on parts of the entire multiplication. So instead of having to reload all the operand B every time that we want to perform a multiplication, we can only store some smaller amount of limbs of the operand of B, and then reuse it until we finish the implementation of one of these rows, which is marked with gray color in the slide. Basically, this is the beginning of the, let's say, more modern ways of multi-precision multiplication when it comes to different platforms. And it is important to note here that these kind of gray zones or gray rows, as they're called, they're basically representing the outer multiplication loop, the interaction between the outer in between the rows represent the outer multiplication loop. However, in the inside, these let's call them short lines, they're representing the inner multiplication loop, and basically the execution flow inside each one of these rows that are like pieces of the entire multiplication.
What you were saying, is it a bit related also to the, like something like Karasuba type approach for multiplication?
Actually, this one, I know it looks a little bit like her, so you're completely right, but it is actually not related. It's again executing the entire multiplication at the same time. The only difference is that we split it in different parts. For example, we execute this small line over here, this small line, this, and each line is going to produce some partial result. Okay, but however, we take the advantage of the operand scanning that we only use very short set of limbs of operand B, which means that we can just load them in the register set and then reuse them for each of the following rows, zones. But like in general, it is it's not Karasuba, it's not implementing two small multiplications and then the addition of a third one. It's just implementing the entire multiplication, but just in split. We split the entire operand execution into different zones, different parts. Where in each part, for example, we can see that actually the gray zones, the rows, they interact in between each other like product scanning. Because basically over here, we're going to compute in the second execution row, we're going to compute, let's say, this partial product until here. We're going to store it in memory. And then we're going to compute to load it again over here where we have to accumulate the rest of the 32-bit multiplication. So in between them, the gray parts, the rows, they act as if it is product scanning. However, inside them, we execute the operand scanning multiplication. So it's just we split it and apply different technique in between the parts so that we can take the best, like the advantages of both multiplication strategies. Okay, so basically the advantages over here, yes, are as we mentioned, we take the best of the operand and product scanning. However, we can also see that this partial, that we're still going to produce somehow large amount of partial results over here, which should be stored and then into the memory and then stored and then loaded again for the when we want to accumulate with the following execution row. So basically, this is the reason why the operand caching technique has been proposed, where basically we can see that we implement exactly the same kind of multiplication, the entire multiplication. However, by changing the execution flow, and basically we can see that inside the rows, basically this time we're going to perform product scanning multiplication strategy. By doing that and by also changing the direction of the multiplication rows, we eliminate this kind of very large amount of temporary or partial results that are going to be computed and then they have to be stored and loaded. Or in other words, we can see that for the execution of every single row, there is we need to store less number of temporal values than the length of the next row that we have to compute. So this is kind of the advantage of this multi-precision multiplication strategy. However, the disadvantage over here is that whereas in the hybrid implementation, we can see that we're operating on 4 operands of B in the same row. Here, the row size has been reduced. We only operate on 3 operand limbs at the same time, which of course again brings the same issue that we have to actually store and load these temporal values. Another disadvantage of this technique is basically that these operands, these limbs that are these words of the operand, at the end of each execution row, for example, when we finish the execution of R0, we cannot reuse these limbs in order to execute, to start the implementation, the execution of row 1. And this is exactly basically these values, they should be dropped and the new operand should be loaded into our register set. And this is the reason why basically the consecutive operand caching it has been proposed. Or in other words, its main advantage is that, let's say, for example, this one is row 1 over here. I don't know if it's visible on the wall, but once we execute this row over here, we're going to have the values of operand A, which we can actually reuse at the beginning of the execution of next multi-precision multiplication row. However, again, like everything that covers one disadvantage, it introduces actually a different disadvantage. And as we can see, actually, the size of the row has been shortened even more. And again, the same issue becomes even worsened, because we have a lot of temporal values that we have to be storing and loading into the memory. Later in the literature, basically, there was this multiplication strategy has been proposed, which is basically very similar. It is the same idea as the operand caching. However, this one is refined, or in other words, basically, as we can see, this length of the rows, it's increased. Okay, so instead of operating only on three limbs per operand for each row, in this time we're operating on 4 operands at the same time. Again, basically, this technique, it was for a long time considered a long time, couple of years, but it was the best strategy that was proposed in the literature, and it's basically very effective, exactly due to the fact that this temporal resulting value is basically reduced as much as possible, because once we increase the row size, or basically the number of accumulative multiplications that we execute at a time, we're actually going to end up with less number of rows, with less number of gray zones. So this is going to result in improved performance result. Okay, basically this one is the last multi-precision multiplication that I'm going to talk about. This one is kind of following the same path, and as we can see over here, this time instead of operating on 4 operands, on 4 limbs at a time, we're going to operate on 5. Or in other words, again, we increase the size of the row. However, as we have mentioned already, our target is very limited when it comes to resources and when it comes to registers. So basically, this implementation, it's not possible to happen. There is not enough space to store 5 limbs of operand A, 5 limbs of operand B, and then another 6 limbs for the partial result value that is going to result in these multiplications over here. So basically, the trick or the strategy that is applied over here is at the very beginning of the multiplication, these operand A and B, they're basically moved into the floating point register set that we discussed. And why this is actually beneficial, because the moving from one to another type of register set is it only costs 1 clock cycle, or in other words, it is ensured to be instant. However, if we have to load and store this value, it's going to cost 2 clock cycles. I want to mention over here why this strategy is more efficient than the previous one, than the refined operand caching than we discussed. Basically, the main reason is we still don't have enough general purpose registers in order to execute all these, to store 5 limbs of operand A and 5 limbs of operand B. However, in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to reserve 5 registers for the operand A and another only 3 for the register B. And we're going to, in each iteration, we're going to load 1 new value, 1 new operand limb, and then we're going to execute 1 reload, which, as we discussed, it's not the best option. However, in this case, it ensures that each column operation is going to result in 2 clock cycles in order to provide our register bank with the needed values, which was exactly the case of the refined operand caching. Since we need 1 load, this load comes from the memory, therefore it requires 2 clock cycles. So for the exact same latency when it comes to the computation, we actually managed to reduce the number of rows as discussed before. So we save from this kind of storing these values into the memory, the temporary values into the memory. So, okay, finally discussing the design that we have proposed in this particular work. Actually, the previous designs, they were also, most of them, work of our Dr. Reza's team. Basically, finally presenting the actual result and design coming from this particular paper. Basically, this is the design, we call it hybrid square multiplication, because basically, as you can see, inside the inner multiplication loop, or in other words, inside these rows, we are the first actually to propose this kind of mixed architecture, since we propose to combine the product scanning with an operand scanning execution flow. Let me explain. So first of all, we're going to, again, as mentioned, increase the row size to 5. Okay, so we're going to have less number of rows, therefore less temporary values that we have to store in the memory. And how this method is different, because the previous one, it was exactly the same. It was having a row size of 5, and here we present exactly the same. Well, basically, this method, it allows us to implement the same, however, without the need to use the floating point registers. Or in other words, not only that we can apply this strategy even when this floating point registers is not available, but also all this transfer at the very beginning of the execution, we basically eliminate it. We don't need it. So in going in a little bit more details, basically, to explain what these lines, like these bolded lines, they mean. In the left-hand side, we can see, in the left-hand side, we can see basically the execution flow when it comes to the entire row. And we can see that each one of these lines basically is going to produce one, not temporary, but value, one resulting value, actually. And in the left-hand side, we can see basically this, each square denotes each one of these dots over here, where we can see that we propose the usage or the implementation of 4 consecutive operand scanning multiplications, followed by 1 product scanning. This is basically going to allow us to use less registers in order to store the temporal results of this multi-precision multiplication technique. And that is why we actually can increase the row size to 5 without the need of floating point registers. So basically, this is, we extended our work, and basically this is another work that we have also published. It is focused on applying this approach to Psi. However, since the multiplications are a little bit larger and a little bit more complex, not only the multiplication, but also the squaring and the reduction. So basically, we had to apply, we used this kind of 2 type of hybrid multiplication inside the rows. One is the one that we just discussed, which has 4 small multiplications, which are executed in an operand scanning fashion, in an operand scanning way, and followed by 1 product scanning multiplication. And we have also applied the same strategy, however reversed. We applied 4 consecutive product scanning and 1 operand scanning multiplication at the end. Actually, this kind of second design we only applied to the reduction step, which is basically here we represent all the multiplications the four prime multiplications that we have implemented, we can see that this kind of second loop is not executed here, but since it is out of the scope of this work, I didn't want to make it too crowded with information. Basically, yes, the second thing that we implemented when it comes to Curve 448 and ED448 is this kind of multi-precision squaring. The tricky part here, and that's probably the reason that we're the first one to implement it in assembly code, is basically the fact that when we do squaring, basically this rhombus is mirrored. Basically the upper part and the down part, they represent exactly the same. However, it is double. For example, if we do, due to the fact that the two operands are the same, what I want to explain is that, for example, to compute A0 times A1 plus A1 times A0, it is the same as saying, okay, I want to compute only A0 times 2 times A0. Is going to be A1 over here. But the thing is, when we mirror it, there is no need to accumulate the results. We can just double them. The tricky part over here is that the prime number basically is composed of exactly 448 bits, which fits perfectly in 14 32-bit registers. However, once we double this number, we actually result with this one carry bit, basically, which we have to simulate another word for the execution of the entire multi-precision squaring, since it results in 449 bits. And basically, this red line on the figure, it represents this kind of simulated word that we have to create. So therefore, the implementation, it becomes asymmetric, which is probably a little bit more challenging when it comes to the implementation design itself. But however, for the multi-precision squaring, we applied only the in the inner multiplication loop, we only applied the operand scanning technique. And again, the reason of that is because we have both operands having the same value. So we have larger set of registers that is being available, and we can basically take advantage of these more registers and implement the more simple architecture. And finally, discussing the results basically that we have obtained, we can see for comparing our work with the previous base implementation of Curve 448 when it comes to specifically this platform, we can see that we obtained around 25 and 35% of improvement when it comes to the multi-precision multiplication and multi-precision squaring. We can also see that basically at the end we ended up with around 48% of improvement of the entire Curve 448, which is basically the point multiplication in this case. But yes, we have significant speed up. And also we can see that in comparison to the previous best work when it comes to ED448, we obtained 13 and 24% again for the multi-precision multiplication and squaring, and for the point multiplication around 12%. This is basically due to the fact that the best work when it comes to Curve 448 was a little bit previous than ED448. We can see also the results that we have obtained in number of code cycles. As we can see, basically there is not a lot of previous work that we can compare with, but yes, we see that we have some improvement when it comes to the number of code cycles. Yeah, I think I'm kind of running out of time. So concluding this work basically very briefly, by this kind of new strategy when it comes to the low-level finite field arithmetic, we basically speeded up Curve 448 and ED448 significantly when it comes to this target platform. We saw around 48 and 11% of improvement when it comes to the implementation of Curve 448 and ED448 when it comes to their timings. Yes, basically this is all based on this kind of hybrid square multi-precision multiplication that we have implemented. And yeah, basically, this is the work that we have been working on. Hopefully, you have some questions. Me.
Okay, thank you. So when you was so what how did you what kind of algorithm did you use for scalar multiplication? Did you use just enough this form a classical one which is valid for all curves?
Yes. Basically, again, it mainly depends. Like all these strategies, it is very related to the platform that is being that is targeted. But basically, in this case, I had additional slides for even more details, but I was thinking, okay, probably it's enough of information. But basically, this Cortex-M4, it has two very, let's call them powerful instructions, which are very, which come at a very cheap cost. Like they only take one clock cycle, which is basically the unsigned multiply long or unsigned multiply accumulate long, which is very how to say very very good to use these instructions for the multi-precision multiplication, specifically because the unsigned multiply accumulate long, it performs 132 by 32 multiplications, resulting in 64. But also it adds two different 32 and 32-bit values. So it is kind of powerful instruction since it performs three operations like long multiplication and two additions in only one cycle. So basically, this is the reason, yeah, that.
But these are field additions, right? So we're talking about field operations.
It is.
But when you're implementing the like you were implementing scalar multiplication or EdDSA, some digital signature on network curves, right? But we have to use point multiplication, like scalar multiplication on the curves.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering if you're using what kind of method you use. There are different methods where you basically recode. So the classical method is that you do a double and add on the curve, right?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
Or like a high level.
It's a Montgomery ladder. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't
Montgomery.
Montgomery ladder. Yes, exactly.
Ladder.
When it comes to the higher level implementation, yeah, I think.
So basically, you only operate basically on the X coordinate, right? This is what the ladder is doing.
Yeah, that's why. Yeah, basically, this kind of speeding up of low-level operations, they have like high impact.
Yeah, they have, but I was wondering also because also the high-level operation also if maybe can also if you use something else like double basis, it could be sped up even more. Like
it maybe
so instead of using. Well, it's something that could be so that there are probably the best way, but yeah, to do scalar multiplication is to represent your scalar as a sum of difference of numbers which are powers of 2 times the power of 3. So if you have a fast way to actually implement the 2 times a point or 3 times a point on the curve, then in fact it
this is true, but yeah,
combined with your fast field operations, that would even maybe speed up even more.
Yeah, this is true. It is also so because Montgomery ladder, it ensures that it's constant time, which is especially for these platforms which are very leaky. It's very important to be careful when it comes to timing attacks, but it's something very interesting which can be also studied. Yes.
Yeah, I have a general question. So now so we are using curves with like underlying bits like 448 nowadays. Right?
Mhm.
Why is that? I thought 256 is enough.
Yeah, well, it just so
Has-
like this one has a higher security level. This one, the
Yeah,
purple
Has the attacking improved? Like, I think last time I looked at this, maybe it's 12 years ago or 13 years ago. I think at that time people still use curves of 256 and 384,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
But that never
typically it's double the symmetric size. Right? If it's 128, symmetric 256 would be.
Oh, you
for,
see.
for elliptic for a general elliptic curve because there's nothing in general faster than generic method. Like for
Oh yeah, the classical.
Yes,
Yeah.
in the classical way.
Basically, this curve for it has 224 bits of security level. So it's kind of the equivalent of curve 25519 when it comes to like increased security.
People are just concerned about the security.
Yeah.
Okay.
But you're right, because like the larger the finite field, the more expensive, like the more costly it becomes to perform the operation. So it's kind of a trade-off, which is what is more required.
So that does this curve do they come with a specific prime for the prime fields?
Yeah, this one is yes. This one is curve for I should have included it. It is 2 to the 448, then the prime value minus 2 to the 224 minus 1. So it's some kind of a special form because it's a lot of ones, like one.
And instruction in the like the for multiplying like in the nodes when you computer are they taking care of? I mean, is there something specific with this prime which encodes these primes also, or is it something which is scalable?
No, it should be implemented. It should be implemented every time in a different way. Like for example, I can show over here like the psych primes, since they're like different number of bits, like P434, P512, 610, and 751. Basically, the same strategy is being applied, but however, it has to be how to say redesigned every time. Like there's not something generic that can be used depending on the prime, or if that's your question. If I understand.
I mean, this depends on the size of the prime, right? But I was wondering if there's something which depends on the fact that the prime has a very low Hamming weight.
No, it hasn't, because these are just like instructions that independently of the values that are being computed, they perform exactly the same. So there is not something offered by the platform itself. It is just independently of what the number is performing. There is some strategies from if.
So the low Hamming weight then has an advantage in software or what?
Yeah, probably this hardware, so it doesn't. There's no like a branch instruction or something, so it doesn't really care about this low level. You like that's the
Basically,
the hardware and
yeah, we call it software because it's in assembly. How we
Oh, I see. Okay.
Still kind of hardware. It's kind of related. Yes, but yeah, basically we don't use any branching because I have heard you mentioning branching. We cannot because
it's probably more expensive.
It is more expensive, and like for example, on this platform, even Karatuba becomes more expensive just because this multiply and accumulate instruction is very powerful. It just does a lot of things in one single clock cycle.
Oh, I see.
And these instructions, and using these instructions, and also about the branching, we just cannot use branching in any situation, because like even if we branch like in between, because in assembly, like the execution flow, like a branch, it's just going to be jumping in the memory from one address to another. So basically this jump is going to be detectable when it comes to, so
I see.
this kind of branches are not recommended at all. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Mila. Any questions? If you have the Zoom. Oh, yeah, on the Zoom, yeah.
Sorry. Well, there is
No,
nothing
there's
in the
no
chat.
chat. Okay. Well, thank you very much. So thank you for following our seminar also. You can follow us. I remind you also, so besides Zoom, there's also a link on research seminars, and we'll keep it updated with the abstract as soon as we can. Okay, so thank you very much, and thank you, Mila.
Thank you very much.